Yeah.
How do you thought?
Whichever color one of them's wearing, the other's wearing the same
How do you
color.
thought about that? Did you sit there?
They're either blue or red or black or white, but it'll be the
You know,
same.
he's got a scoliosis and he's a little
Yes.
bit lame, but he is one of those people at work that's always smiling, livens up the place. People are glad to see him. So he bears his image well. Okay, so we're on the last section of the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to finish this up, and we're going to get to the parable of the builders who built the rock on the sand. What do you call that parable?
Excuse me.
It's not the parable of the builders, it's the parable of the houses, I guess.
Yeah, it's, yeah, the solid foundation parable, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What's the official
You're
name?
about
of
the
that
one he
parable?
builds on the,
Yeah, it's a.
The wise man and the foolish
last man builds his house on the
Yeah,
rock.
yeah,
I think it is a parable of the builders.
okay, well,
But you
anyway,
know, all of that's been done by whoever is publishing
I know.
that particular version of the Bible. So it does vary a little bit from time to time.
Like this Sermon on the Mount, it's something that was, title that was given to it, you know.
Right, exactly. So anyway, so we'll get to that on Easter. So this will be our last little Sermon on the Mount, and we'll do that one. And then Chris is gonna start sort of a little mini-series, and we'll stay up with him. All right, Joe, you wanna read this?
Matthew 7:14. Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. For which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the gate is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few.
So I didn't break this up into its respective paragraphs, and I did that on purpose because that's the way the text flows, and
Yeah.
maybe it'll force us to find some associations that we wouldn't otherwise when we kind of.
Yeah, I noticed you did that 13, added 13 and 14 to it, and actually it does kind of flow. You see it in paragraph form.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the beginning. Ask, seek, and knock. What do these words have in common?
They're all looking for something and expecting an answer.
Okay? They're all active on your part.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, you had the question there, because I was gonna say that, but you had more intense than the others.
Okay?
And I did think that there is one that is more intense, and that is the one that's asked. I think it's more intense than the others. And my reason for saying that is that between all of these are something that we're looking beyond our own means, our own being to someone else to give us the answer, to give us the goods, I would say. And the others, I mean, seek, that, we have to look at this, in the terms of the biblical situation in which it's said in. Ask would be like, ask what is reasonable of God. Seek what is reasonable to seek or to look for. And knock when you actually do need to enter in, So in a short version, we don't see that, but in the terms that Jesus is talking about it, that's what he's,
Yeah.
what he's saying.
It occurred to me that also, he's not necessarily it. Well, what is it? Is it exactly what you asked for? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. You will find. Was it exactly what you were seeking? Oftentimes not. Knock and the door will be open. Well, sometimes you find out it's a different door, right?
Yeah.
But a door is open. So, and there's a tense thing. These are sort of ongoing. So you're doing it ongoing, and there's a present and a future perfect kind of element to it. It will happen. It will be happening.
And it's funny because, you know, in verse 8, he's actually repeating, he's actually, you know, furthering this, because he's already said, for everyone who asks receives, because he says, ask and it will be given to you. And he says, for everyone who asks receives. I mean, he's, you know, he's just kind of multiplying what he, you know, has already said.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the one who seeks finds, because he's already said that these will happen to you. But then, you know, then he gives us, here again, one of Jesus' examples, the light in the eye. You know, he gives us the example of bread and rock, which it seems like in everything that he teaches, you know, he puts a little bit of the humor in it, you know.
So I think this plays in well with these two parables in Luke. So let's read those. Mike, can you read Luke 11, 5 through 10? And Philip, will you read Luke 18, 1 through 6?
18.
Yes, sir. The widow and the unjust judge.
We don't have those on the page, do we?
Yeah, they're right there. Luke 11, oh, we don't have them printed out.
No, they're not printed, no.
I wanted to keep it on one page.
Just a minute. I brought my Bible in my pocket.
And he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. There was a widow in that city who kept coming to him, saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I fear neither God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?
All right, very good. Did you find that one?
Yeah. 18, 1 through 6.
No,
Mhm.
11, 5 through 10. I got it here.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I had,
I,
just a minute.
11, 5 through 10. So this is the persistent friends, which is similar theme. Then he said to them, suppose one of you has a friend and he goes to him at midnight and says, friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread, because a friend of mine on a journey has come to me and I have nothing to set before him. Then the one inside answers, don't bother me. The door is already locked and my children are with me in bed. I can't get up and give you anything. I tell you, though he will not get up and give him the bread because he is his friend, yet because of the man's boldness or persistence, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened. Okay, so how do they relate to the teaching of Matthew 7? Well, I think they're teaching the same point. The person who is persistent in his asks can expect a response from God. God is not going to not respond, and he's a good father. Matthew 7 is teaching, wants to give good things. So, that gets me into 3. What do these verses teach about God's relationship to us? Well, I said 1. What else do they teach about us? God's a good father, and he wants, we should write these down. He wants to be asked. Okay?
And we talked about this once before.
Yeah.
yeah, something similar. You're right.
Some of you brought up about your kids. You know what they need, but you like to have them come and say, and ask you about it.
You know, it's interesting, verse 8 of Luke 11, you're reading there. One of the things that that at the end of that verse, when in the Greek, there's so many different ways that can be, translated. NIV says, because of friendship, because of your shameless audacity, but one of the actually several translations actually translate that as yet to preserve his good name. He will then get up and I thought about that before because, God doesn't have to preserve his good name. He doesn't have to, he does what he does because he loves us, and if we love him back, then he will show us his love by, giving when we ask.
Mhm.
Now, the problem with that is people that read this in Matthew's account, understanding that Matthew and Luke are kind of bounced off each other. Because, here Jesus says, for everyone who asks receives, and, everyone who seeks finds. So people use it to say, well, God didn't answer me. When I asked, he didn't give to me. I've heard this from people. We all have, and you hear this from people, and, it's difficult to teach something in a way that makes, it's in a way kind of makes a contradiction to what Jesus is saying here.
Mhm.
You say, well, are you sure you asked for the right thing? It doesn't say that. It says all I have to do is ask. Now, these are adults.
Yeah.
Children, it's easy to kind of go back, but when it's adults doing it, it's, the tendency to take scripture so literally, and to take, teaching so literally is paramount in a lot of those who disbelieve after a short while.
What you're saying is that we read the passage out of its context, but Jesus gave this teaching within a context. And it was not within a context, ask for anything you want and you'll get it. That's not the context. Because the context tells us that these are things that the good Father would certainly give. You ask for bread, you ask for a fish, you didn't ask for something wild and exotic that you didn't. He doesn't use examples
Maybe
like,
you
you
were
want a
asking
new
for a
house,
scorpion. Yeah.
you want a new house, just ask God. That's not in the context of what he's saying here. And when you look at these two examples that you have given us, the stories of the two people who are persistent, the same thing is true there. Judges are not supposed to be like that judge. The whole idea of a judge is to give justice. So basically, I think what that parable is telling us is that when we go to God, we expect justice. We don't expect God to answer us just because we ask him 20 times. And he finally gets, people take this and say, well, you keep asking God, he'll eventually get tired of hearing you. Well, that's not what I don't believe that's what that passage is teaching. And the same thing is true with the parable of the guy in the house who puts this question is who has a neighbor who wouldn't get up and give you bread? Why? Because if he refuses and you don't have bread to give your guests, you have suffered a major social, yes, major. And your neighboring would just be over with. You would lose your neighbor because
Yeah.
you could not stand to have that kind of a neighbor. You couldn't deal with that kind of a neighbor. So
Because
even though
hospitality
the
was so-
circumstances are extreme,
Yeah.
the neighbor has a higher obligation. And so does God. God has a higher obligation
And that's, that's, because what Jesus is talking about here, he's dealing with the nature of the Father. He's dealing with the nature of God, not the nature of mankind. And that's difficult for us to understand, that there is quite a difference there. Let me explain that a little further. If you go to God the Father and you have something sinful in your life, or something that's going, and you ask for forgiveness of that sin, you expect God to forgive you of that sin. You expect that. And there, we don't see the forgiveness. We don't necessarily feel the forgiveness, but we know that we're told that God will forgive our sins if we yet ask Him. However, if you continue in that sin, you repeat that sin over and over, and you still stand before God on a daily basis asking Him forgiveness of that sin, is that right to do that? Is it right to go to God with that? Is it right to ask God every day for forgiveness of that sin when you know that you should not be doing it, and you know that it shouldn't be there? I mentioned, you were here last week, were you? Were you? Okay. I mentioned the church with the gay couple, and basically that's what they're doing. They're coming and they're saying, we want to be forgiven, but they still keep living together.
It's asking for forgiveness without repentance.
Exactly. Yeah. And
So that kind of flies in the face of the character of God.
Right. And I think the same thing happens sometimes when we take these first couple of verses here, 7 and 8, and we make this fit our needs, or we attempt to make it fit our needs, and not the needs, our spiritual needs, more of our physical needs. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
More of our physical needs and not so much our spiritual needs.
Yeah. So, I mean, but I don't know that it doesn't say that. So we said,
Well, a fish is spiritual. I mean, a fish is not spiritual, a fish is physical. A loaf is physical. So Jesus is maintaining something physical here,
yeah.
But
But I want to go back to something Philip said. He said,
Okay.
sometimes people say this just shows you what you need to do is bother God until he'll relent.
My kids have done that, yeah.
But I don't know that it doesn't say that it's okay to be shameless and persistent. Is that wrong? And if so, tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, Jesus went to his Father 3 times in the garden. Yes,
So
he
did
was.
Paul. So evidently, if you do exegesis on that passage, you get 3 shots at it.
3 strikes you're out.
Jesus, I like that, yeah.
Okay.
The theology from the one side, go to the,
So you kind of peripherally addressed this already, John. Suppose number 6. Suppose someone says, "My prayers were not answered." What do you say to them?
Well, I wrote in my blog this week, I don't remember which psalm I was in, but it's 12 or 13 or 14 to something about God helping the needy. And I wrote in my blog, when you pray for your wants, but God answers your needs. And I believe that is true. Because we sometimes have trouble distinguishing a want from a need.
desire, yeah.
Because there are things I think I really need this.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what Paul thought, because he said, this is going to affect me. I won't be able to do what I need to do. This is going to get in the way of my ministry, and so on and so on and so forth. So God, I need you to do this. And God is saying, well, that's what you want, Paul, but that's not what you need. You'll be better off having this, whatever it is. Now that's a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
Say, I'm tired of this IT band hurting and this place in my back. So I get up every morning, I can hardly walk, and by evening I can hardly walk, and I'm tired of the pain. But maybe that's keeping me humble, or maybe that's keeping me from doing something else. I don't know. I'm just saying, if I pray, I'm afraid the won't. The won't is, I don't wanna be in pain. But is that what I need?
So that sometimes makes me just sort of, not lackadaisical, fatalistic, maybe that's the right word, you know, well, God's just gonna give me what I need, so,
Watch out.
dear God, give me what I need, amen, you know, yeah, why should I bother? But it'll happen, whatever, if it didn't, I didn't need it, so, but clearly these passages tell us we need to be asking, so that flies in the face of that. So how do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, especially, you know, I mean, we're looking here at, you know, the so-called Sermon on the Mount, or we can look in Luke at the so-called Sermon on the Plain, which is plainly about the same thing, it's about the same time, you know, same teachings of Christ, no matter how you say it. But then we gotta carry this over to Paul's teachings. You know, we gotta carry it, you know, into John's teachings, or Peter's teachings, or.
Okay, so tell us what you find there.
And when we carry it into there, you know, we find, you know, Paul giving examples of his own, in his own life, of, you know, well, you know, like you know, God took this thorn from, you know, I mean, we recognize that someone, even as spiritual and, you know, as significant to the gospel as Paul was, God didn't necessarily, you know, provide him with everything. I mean, Paul went through a lot. He was, you know, he was beaten, he was scourged, he was, you know, he had a lot of reasons to throw it all down and just walk away. But he didn't. Why? Why didn't he? Because of his faith. He didn't because he knew that was not the right thing to do. And I think that's part of what Jesus is saying here, you know. And, you know, he doesn't give the specific example, but he does say, you know, if you ask for a fish, do you give somebody a serpent? You know, if you ask for a loaf of bread, do you give them a rock? Well, to us that sounds almost, you know, preschool. You know, no, we know that you wouldn't do that. So why is Jesus saying this here?
Mm-hmm.
But he's saying it because later on, you know, as Christianity, as it builds up steam and it, you know, the movement really starts to, you know, to broaden from Pentecost forward, especially. All these things are brought into bear, you know, in what others will now teach, especially like, because we have so many of Paul's writings. I guess it's because, you know, we see Paul doing this letter to the Ephesians, you know,
So,
not to give up, you know,
Yeah.
to persevere, to continue. Letters to the Galatians, the same thing. Don't give up, persevere, you know. I mean, that was the message, on and on and on. And I think that's kind of what Jesus is saying, you know, persevere, you know. But he's saying it in a way that was gentle at that time. You know, when people didn't quite understand, how can this man, who calls himself the Messiah, actually, that's false, because he never does call himself the Messiah here. But
So let's change tacks here. So look at number 4. And maybe I'm revealing what I believe. So when I get that fatalistic attitude, what am I revealing about my belief about God? Well, one thing I might be revealing is that he's not really that interested in me. Or another thing I might be revealing is that I don't really think he changes his mind. Another thing I might be revealing is that I think he's kind of aloof and detached from what the details of everyday life and what's happening. That might be. So they're kind of, what are the intellectual and theological roadblocks to prayer in number 8? Those are some of them. When you start to have those beliefs, why should you pray? Because if you really think God's sovereign and on the throne and not really, everything's mapped out in the future, you have a highly Calvinistic view of the world, then it doesn't make sense. What do you think, Phil?
Well, I think part of the problem is that we get into this bind where we start looking at the polarization of ideas. And we, on the one hand, could say, well, you did a minute ago, okay, God knows what I need, so why bother? If he's gonna give me what I need and what I want, why bother saying, this is what I want? And the other extreme might be to say, well, I'm gonna keep praying this because I know that I need it, and I'm gonna convince God that I do. And somewhere in between there, what Jesus is trying to teach us is that prayer has power and that God does change his mind, but not necessarily according to our standard or our measurement. He considers many things. And one of them is, I really believe this, and this is not a thing that you find in so many words, it's sort of just, it's like the icing on top of the cake. So it's part of the cake, but it's not in the cake itself. There's this overarching theme that God loves me,
Paramount.
and that all of his decisions relative to my life are filtered through that. So if I want something and he decides that it's good for me to have it, then what's wrong in me asking for it and wanting it? Maybe God will give it to me, even though he's not obligated to just give it to me because I want it. My goodness, as a parent, how many of us have done things for our kids that in our wisdom we thought, this is probably not that necessary. And we shower them at Christmas time with stuff that is not necessary, and on their birthdays and other times as well. We go out of our way to do things because we love them. And so I've given my kids things they wanted, like ice cream when they didn't need it. Not sure it was good for them. Candy, not sure it was good for them. Dick, we should have some M&Ms. Could I have a Snickers bar? So I think you take this overarching theme, and when you pray to God, you understand that that's the theme under which you're praying. That is the measurement by which your prayer is heard. So there's no need for us to get out here on the fringes and say, okay, God, I'm just not going to say anything to you anymore because you're not going to do anything but what you want to do, and so what's the point? Because that's not true.
I wonder,
Otherwise, you can't explain Jesus on his knees in the garden,
Yeah,
laying
yeah.
prostrate on the ground.
pause for a second. I wonder if you grew up in a really strict house where mom and dad always said, no, 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 and you just stop asking. If you view God kind of like that, I'm not even gonna bother to ask, I'm sorry, but continue.
No, I think it's a good point.
But Gethsemane,
That's
Garden
it.
of Gethsemane,
Yeah, I mean, how do you explain that if Jesus doesn't believe there's possibility?
Well, you know, that's,
So what he wanted was two things. And the problem was, he couldn't have two things. And God had to choose between the two.
the two being fulfilling his purpose.
Do it some other way,
Oh,
but getting it done.
uh,
He had a goal, redemption of mankind. Process, go to the cross, be separated, go to hell. So he wants to do A, he doesn't want to do B. So he prays and God has to choose. Suppose Jesus had been left to choose. You read the description of what he's going through, what his reaction is. And it isn't until God finally says to him, no. And he gets up and it's like, okay, we're going to do it. And that's exactly the case with Paul. Please, Lord, please, Lord, please, Lord. No, Paul. Get on with the business. Okay. I'll deal with the thorn. And I think, you know, that's the problem with my wants, is God may look at my want and see, okay, that's a good want, or he may look at it and say, that's not a good want. And I'm not toying with Garth Brooks's thank God for unanswered prayers either, but I think there's probably some truth in that God has spared me in my life from things I wanted.
Yeah. Good
But,
point.
you know, yeah, I mean, that's really part of us learning to accept God's will over our own. I mean, that's something that we have to teach as well, as, you know, you ask through prayer and it will be given to you, but we also have to teach that, you know, your will is not that of God, and God's will is priority over our own. And it's interesting how, you know, in this, Jesus carries this, you know, the way that the writer in Matthew has it, he carries this right into this golden rule type of thing.
So how are those related?
You know, because really, it's not related. If you were to specifically sit down and dissect it, it's not related, except for this, that when he's talking about, you know, giving someone something they ask for. You know, if your neighbor comes in the middle of the night at midnight and says, I need 3 loaves of bread, you know, or he says, you know, I need beans, I need what, you know, whatever. And you drag yourself out of bed and you accommodate them. You know, I think that's really where he pulls this in, you know, so, you know, and everything do to others what you would have them do to you. You know, down through the ages, this has been said another way. Don't do to others what you would, you know, what you wouldn't want done to you, to yourself. I mean, but here it's stated in a different way. So in everything, do to others.
So I think it's kind of a reflection on your father listens to what you need, he gives you, so you turn around and be that same kind of person. It's a lot like the parable of the merciful servant.
But he does it, this is the thing that's interesting, he does it in the Jewish context here. He does it under the premise of the law. You know, which would be normal because of the day and time, and that this is a Jewish audience. You know, if this rolled off his tongue and it says, well, this sums up, this is the total,
Yeah.
this is the tally of the law and the prophets, that you treat one another, you know, fairly, which he's already said now, you know, previous to this in this same message. You know, we were talking about, you know, prayer a while ago, Matthew 6, and what, 6, 7, 8, 9, you know, he talks about prayer there. And he says, you know, don't babble on and don't keep on and on and on. Don't be like them, for your Father knows your needs before you ask them.
Right.
You know, and if you tie that into you know these verses in chapter 7, it's a little bit of a conundrum, because you know we're saying ask, you know, we're saying seek, you know, which basically all three of these are kind of the same thing. They're just coming from a different angle.
Gotcha.
I just, the way that Jesus does this, when he gets to verse 13, you know, he talks about you know the narrow gate, the wide gate, you know, that's an idea, a concept that we have a hard time actually understanding. But in biblical times, all the great cities had the main gates, and then they had the narrow gates that were like pedestrian gates. And if you had a large crowd of people trying to get into the city walls, it made sense of them. You wouldn't go to the eye of the needle or to the small gate and try to get a bunch in. You would go where it was easiest for everybody to get in. And they would have understood this. And today we have to explain it to people. This is what is meant by this. This is the example that he's using. And he's, you know, but he's also doing it in a spiritual way. You know.
So we've got a few more minutes here. I wanna touch on the last couple questions and then we'll wrap up here. So let's talk about this golden rule. And Matthew 7:12, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So sometimes people say, you know, it's easy. Religion's easy. Just follow the golden rule. Is that sufficient or not? And why do you say that?
As in how now? I may not be understanding your question.
Just just follow the golden rule. That's all you need to do.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, if you said, yeah, as long as you follow the golden rule and your soul's good, your heart's good, your soul's good.
Well, maybe not even for that, but even as just as a matter of behavior,
So in a social way,
perhaps. I said as a matter of ethics, but
yeah.
Mike, what do you think?
As long as, what, if what you, the way you'd like to be treated is, not something immoral, you know, but, yeah, it's pretty much, takes care of, most situations that you get into, and, how you would like for the other person to treat you is, how you ought to be treating him, and it's, I don't know if it's the answer for every situation necessarily, but, I think it's pretty close.
Pretty good place to start. I agree with you. My only thought about it is like maybe, and when we get into more complicated things, you know, I don't even know what's best for myself sometimes. And so sometimes what I would want is not what God wants. And so I may not make the best decisions for what other people want. I think about my children. I'm trying to do for them the best I know how, and it's, I still only halfway get there, but I think it's a really good place to start. We won't be perfect, but we'll do pretty well if you just obey the golden rule. What do you think, Philip?
Well, I think we have a sense of fairness, and that may be cultural in some respects, but I think there's within humanity, I think it's evident from the scriptures that there's a sense of fairness. And I think that's what he's talking about. It's what we expect from God. Abraham said, will not the God of all the earth do right? And isn't that what we want? I want you to do the right thing. And so I need to do the right thing by you. If I don't want you to gossip about me, I shouldn't gossip about you. If I want you to get up and open your door at midnight, then I should be willing to get up and open my door at midnight. I should live my life by the same measure that I expect others to treat me. And I think underneath that, he mentions it, he says, this is what the whole law and prophets are saying. And you get into the prophets, and you have all these statements about, God says, what about these sacrifices? Get them out of my place. I don't want to see them. Why? Because they were not right. You know, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, and love others like yourself. That's what's right. And what would be fairer than if we could count on every single person doing what is fair? Right. But we, as people, confuse it with legal.
It's a very interesting concept in this way, that even had Jesus not said this, even if it was not here, and I'll just throw this in here, just the most of the earliest manuscripts don't include this verse. It's not found in them. It's found a little bit later on in the middle of the second century, late second century, the early third century. But that being said, you know, when he says this one thing in here, for this sums up the law and the prophets, is that true? You know, do others what you would have them do to you, you know, as you would do to them? You know, that's how you do. So it's just simply stated, you know, the golden rule, do unto others as you have them do unto you. Is that truly the sum of the law and the prophets? I mean, if you were to sit down and basically, because that's what Jesus is saying here. That's hard for us or difficult for us to actually understand that point that he made there, because we've never been under the law. We've never been taught the prophets, you know, as they were. So I think that meaning for us just simply is the way that the world has made this out to be. I mean, there are people that go and try to find, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you as a scripture in the Bible, and they're not going to find it. This is where that comes from. But they never continue, because this is the summary of the law and the prophets, because we don't understand that. Not trying to make that a more difficult, you know, piece of text than it is. It's just that.
I have no idea what you're saying, John.
What I'm saying is this: if Jesus had not put this in here, did they understand that at this time as being the law and the prophets? We wouldn't understand that. But if Jesus had not put that in here, with everything else that he says, would they understand that this golden rule is what they were taught in the law and the prophets? Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean,
Have they lost that message?
right. I mean, is that why he is saying this? Because they don't understand that anymore.
Yeah.
Is he now
I
saying
think so.
this?
Just like when he says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy.
Right, which it never says that.
Right.
You
And so-
can't find that anywhere.
So this is yet another example where he's teaching, where they drifted away from the true message of the law and the prophets, as God had originally intended it,
Yeah.
and kind of made this other system. And he's
So, you know,
trying-
when he says this, he's reinforcing a thought or an idea that they might not have fully understood
Yeah,
even then.
that's fair enough, yeah, so they probably had lost that
And
idea.
that's why, you know, that's why it's in here,
Yeah,
you know.
that's good.
And so for
I
us.
think the other important point of your observation is that Paul isn't making this up, you know, later on. You know, this is not something the church invents. It's not a new thing. It's in the Old Testament and the New Testament. This is the same God. It's a unified idea
Right.
that runs through the Old Testament and the New Testament.
All right.
Good, yeah. All right, I agree with that. Okay, all right, so,
Well, would you say that the problem that has occurred over the 1,500 years that they've been doing the law and the prophets, that they have reduced the law and the prophets to a system of legal codes
yes,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
lost the heart of the message? And I would say that that's the danger that we have as well.
And that may be the whole point of the Sermon on the Mount to these, you know, the whole idea here, you know, according to a lot of scholars, is that he's teaching them something that they should already know. He's telling them things that they should already learn, that they should, you know. But at the same time, you have to look at where he is. You know, you have to look at this in context to the region that he's in, and just exactly how poor these people were. Jesus, he you know, he taught that, you know, the lame, the blind, you know, those that were filled with evil, and, you know, and quite different than what the Pharisees and the you know, the teachers of that day were doing. They were just, you know, 180 degrees, you know, 360, I should say, you know, opposite of this, you know, And they turned 180 degrees and then they didn't stop, they just kept going. And now I think Jesus is starting to put their moral compass back together again, you know, and,
So, but I think you're right to bring that point up, and between your point and Philip's point, that sometimes we overcomplicate things, we legalize things, we codify things, and the religion God brings us in His true message in the law, the prophets, and the Sermon on the Mount, and the New Testament, like James says, religion is this: care for the widows and orphans in their distress, and what's the other thing?
Keep yourself unspotted from
Yeah,
the world.
right.
So plain.
It doesn't have to be too complicated, so there's a.
Well, think about how many things Jesus says along the way that are basically saying, quit establishing legal boundaries. Because a lot of the questions that he got referenced legal boundaries. Peter says, how often should I forgive my neighbor? Let's set a legal boundary. That way, I know where I stand. And Jesus said, no, there's no boundary.
because they were used to boundaries.
Well, that's how they viewed the law.
Right.
Yeah.
That was.
So on the Sabbath day, depending on which Jewish rabbi you followed, your restraints on the Sabbath day were a list of things that you cannot find in the law. But they did that in order to know that they were safe.
You know,
But that's the danger of grace. Grace takes you away from a transactional system where I did this and I can expect this of God and He can only expect this of me.
legalism.
To grace puts that away and said, well, I didn't really do anything to get it, so kind of there's no end to God's expectations of me in that system. He can expect me to live this way, caring for my neighbor all the time, you know.
You know,
So
when
it's a
it-
little, in that sense, it's a scary.
Yeah, because a Christian, what Jesus is saying all through the New Testament about these, you've heard it said, is there isn't any legal boundary that says, okay, I've done enough. I'm through. I met my quota, or whatever words you want to use.
Yeah.
I've given all I'm gonna give. I've done all I'm gonna do. I've visited the hospital all I'm gonna visit. You know, I mean, whatever. We don't have boundaries.
You know, I think this always brings me back to the thought of the writer in John, when John ends by saying, you know, this isn't nearly all that Jesus ever said. This isn't even, he said, because the volumes would be innumerable. You know, we could just go on and on and on and on writing. And when you think about that, it's just, that's mind-boggling. Because, you know, we have it in paper about that thick, you know.
Yeah, 3 years worth of lectures,
Yeah.
and they're reduced to,
Yeah.
what's the little book that you get
Yeah.
for studying for school?
Oh, Cliff's Notes.
Cliff
Notes.
Yeah.
They're reduced to Cliff Notes.
That's true, that's another point. All right, thank you very much for your attention, and so there's several themes there that you can chase on Sunday. You got plenty to talk about, good important stuff.
Did you push the record button?
I think I did. Hope I did. I don't know. Yeah, it says recording.
Okay.
All right.